Today we're going to be talking about power. Power is an essential element of leadership. When we think of what leadership is, which is the ability to influence a group of people towards accomplishment of a goal, power is an integral part of that. It's part of influencing, it's part of goal accomplishment. Power is such an essential element of leadership that really we can think of the study of leadership as the study of the application, the use of power. Today we're going to be talking about four aspects of power. We're going to define power as the ability to usurp another person's will. We're going to talk about the sources of power, which include reinforcement, punishment, formal expertise, and referent. We'll talk about how power has a strong social impact. And then finally, we'll discuss the fact that the psychological perception of power is often more important than power per se. So let's begin by talking about what power is, the ability to usurp another person's will. So power allows us to usurp another person's will. It allows us to take control of their behaviors in some way. The way I think about power is whenever you ask someone to do something for you and they do not have total freedom to say no, then you have some amount of power or influence over them. You have compromised their will in some way. You have some leverage over them. Power is a spectrum. It's not all or nothing. In a philosophical way, no one ever has power over us, right? I always have the ability to say no. That might lead to me losing my job and being in extreme financial difficulties. If we're under a totalitarian regime, that might lead to me being shot. But ultimately, that's my decision, right? I have the will to choose those things from a philosophical perspective. In reality, of course, life is much more complicated than that, and there's this big gray area in regard to how much power people actually have over us. In my personal experience, many people don't know how to use power responsibly. And one of the best illustrations of this is people who win the lottery. So people who win the lottery often come from lower socioeconomic class. They might not be as educated. And these are people who in their life haven't had as much access to power and they're not used to power. And then they win the lottery and suddenly they have access to all of this power through money, right? And there's evidence showing that people that win the lottery are actually more likely to declare bankruptcy than people in their social class are on average. And my explanation for this is that when someone's not used to power and then suddenly you give them a lot of power, they don't know how to use it responsibly and they actually end up hurting themselves or the people around them. And we see this in work settings all the time, right? Where people are given power and they don't know how to use power responsibly. And so they end up being totally hands-off and not using their power to advocate for the kind of change and progress that's necessary. Or they become micromanagers. They become bullies who use their power for the sake of power. People are often very clumsy with the power they have. As a society, we're not great at teaching people how to use power effectively or responsibly. The way that I see it is people often use power like a new driver uses the brakes. If you remember when you were learning how to drive, or if you've had the pleasure of being with a new driver recently, new drivers tend to use the brake as either on or off, right? They don't use the brake, and then they'll slam it on. And it leads to this really kind of jerky driving experience. That's how I notice a lot of people use power, that they're cautious about using their power, and they don't use it, and then they use all of it at once. An example of this would be a supervisor that doesn't give you much feedback and then fires you out of the blue, right? That supervisor had the power to give you feedback, to develop you, to improve your performance, and they didn't invest in that. And instead, they just use all their power at once, which is to terminate you.